Many of you must be wondering by now why we cannot prosecute politicians for fraud for saying they're going to do one thing and then doing another when they eventually get into office, or even saying one thing while they're in office which seems in some respects to be patently untrue. Now that's a very good question with a frustratingly and rather disappointingly simple answer, which I'll come to in this video, but not before I expose what I think is, I can only describe it as gaslighting the general public, and I'll explain why. With a shocking discrepancy between what was said before and what's happening now. I know I'm sort of grinning as I say it because nothing is shocking anymore, let's face it. But if you do like this sort of brutal analysis of what's going on with a sprinkling of the law and how it applies to politics and everyday events, please do subscribe to the channel. I am ever grateful for you doing that. About half of you still don't do that, but watch regularly. I'd really appreciate it if you do. I depend on you, the viewer, because I have no big media company behind me. So thank you very much for that. So where do we start? Well, I'm going to start with this tweet here from this post. I still call them tweets. Post from Keir Starmer, which has been described by many as gaslighting the general public. That is, trying to make you believe a thing when most people know that that's not really true. Which is sort of the crux of this video, getting to the truth of things. He says, "We are putting more money in your pocket. From April, millions of working people will get a pay rise." Now, he's talking, of course, as somebody did quite rightly point out, he's talking, of course, to the increase in minimum wage. But he fails to mention, and nowhere is there any mention in that post, of things that are going up in price. So whilst he may, on a technical level, be correct that millions of people would get a pay rise if they are on minimum wage and the minimum wage goes up, this does obviously not take into account the vast swathes of people that are not on minimum wage and will not get a pay rise. It doesn't take account of those that received winter fuel allowance that will no longer receive it. Doesn't take into account the millions of parents who send their children to private schools who will have to pay 20% VAT on those fees, which is many thousands of pounds a year. It doesn't include any reference to council tax increases, which is quite a pointed subject, which I'm going to come back to a little bit further on in this video. Doesn't take into account water bill increases, electricity and gas increases, employer national insurance increases, which of course are all borne by the worker. Don't be fooled into thinking that it's the company's responsibility and nothing to do with you. If the company is paying it one way or another, you're paying it. And also, together with that, the lower threshold for paying these increases in employer national insurance. Stamp duty increases, the energy price cap I've mentioned is going up, and very much more. We've talked about in the farm inheritance tax, and not to mention that whilst he says some people will be getting a pay rise, how many thousands of people are actually losing their jobs because these companies are cutting their staff because they need to cover their costs. And not to mention, while we're talking about companies in general, the thousands of companies and retail consortiums and health and hospitality consortiums that have said their prices are going to have to go up because they have to cater for the additional costs. And then, not to mention yesterday, my Money Channel video. I'll link my Money Channel below if you want to learn how to create wealth and all of that sort of stuff. Subscribe to my Money Channel. I'll link down below. Because cash ISAs are now apparently under threat as well, because lo and behold, Rachel Reeves has sat down with a group of companies that said, we've got an idea. Why don't you take these billions of pounds that people have got saved away safely in cash ISAs and let us invest them in riskier investments? Now, of course, they would want to do that because then there's all sorts of fees and advice and products and everything else that they can dump the money into. Whereas people have actually put it in there for a reason. It's a safe place to save the money. with a little bit of a tax incentive on not paying the tax on the interest in that account. More about that in my money video. If you want, I've got a deep dive into ISAs. If you don't understand them, I don't expect everybody to understand them. A lot of people are either not interested or just haven't had the time to look into them. I've got a video which explains it for you in great detail, about 18 minutes worth of detail. I'll link that below. Go and watch that as well. But nonetheless, those cash ISAs are now potentially under threat as well. But we come back to the hypocrisy and saying one thing meaning another and doing another in many cases. Let me take you to a video which I'm going to borrow a small portion of from Talk TV. I'll link below for full credit. Listen to this. This is what Keir Starmer said about council tax before they got into office.
Labour would freeze council tax next year. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax. Not a penny more than the bill you paid last year.
But that's not true. It's patently untrue. So how can a politician, I will explain a little bit later in this video, how can a politician make a statement, make a claim, which turns out to be patently untrue? And it is patently untrue because I talked in a previous video about a question mark over whether there's unlawful council tax rises, because it would be unlawful for councils to increase the tax beyond the 5% cap, which was set by the Tories. They set it as a 5% threshold beyond which they cannot increase the council tax without a referendum of the local community to say, yes, we agree to increasing our council tax beyond 5%. And without that referendum, without a yes vote from local constituents, they couldn't do it. Save for they could always go begging to the government and say, please let us increase the council tax beyond this 5%. And that's what I talked about in a previous video. I'll link that below as well. And in response to all of that, it was reported yesterday that 6 of these requests for council tax increases have been approved. Now, the referendum is required beyond the 5% overall cap. As I say, the standard increase is 3% plus a further 2% for those on social care responsibilities and all that sort of stuff, with a maximum of 5%. Beyond that, they need permission. So 6 of these requests to go beyond that 5% cap have now been approved. So clearly, the statement from Keir Starmer here, where he says not a penny more on your council tax, is patently untrue, because 6 of these have now been given permission. The Windsor Maidenhead warned that 25% would be necessary. The government's allowed a maximum of 9%. So this appears to me to be the old case of ask for very much more than we really want, so that when it comes down to what we get, doesn't seem so bad, does it? Well, actually 9% is obviously almost double the cap that they were supposed to increase it by, without permission, a referendum in the local area to say, yes, we agree to this increase. 7.5% has been approved for Birmingham, and this, bearing in mind, this is only a year after it was increased by 9.99% due to their financial difficulties at the time. So this isn't just a 7.5% increase. This is a 7.5% increase on top of the 9.99% increase from a year ago. They initially planned to increase the rate by the same amount and had a deficit of £165 million. And this all seems a little bit dangerous to me, because allowing these local authorities to increase by these percentages when they've already increased it and ostensibly mismanaging money and just not operating efficiently enough to stay within budget, they're just allowing them more. And now the second year, Somerset has applied for a council tax rise above the limit, but this is the first time that it's been accepted. Now they can increase it by 7.5% next year. Bradford, they sought permission to increase by 15%. Now they've been approved for a 10% rise. So I think there's a summary table down here of all of these that have been allowed to increase. So up to and including 10% for Bradford, 6 of these have now been approved, despite Keir Starmer saying that not a penny more would be added to the council tax. Now this comes back to the question, how is it that they can make these statements and not be held accountable, not be prosecuted for fraud in the worst sense of the word? Now, there's a very simple reason for that. And in fact, politicians have previously been sued. In fact, I think it was 2019, somebody crowdfunded to the tune of £300,000 to prosecute Boris Johnson for arguments that he misled the public over Brexit and the money from the NHS and all of that sort of stuff. And he received a summons, but he challenged that in the High Court, and the High Court quashed the summons, saying that it was politically motivated and vexatious in nature. So they did try to hold Boris Johnson to account for what he had said, and the High Court threw that out. And that is the crux of the reason. If these statements are political in nature and an attack upon them, let's say, are allegations of fraud and allegations that they've misled the public, lied, etc., they would all be seen as politically motivated and de facto vexatious. Now, there is a huge philosophical debate as to whether we should be able to prosecute politicians and hold them accountable for what they've said. And I personally, opinion alert here, I personally think we should be able to hold them accountable for what they've said in their manifesto. I think if a politician says, here's our manifesto and here's what we're going to do, I think if they don't do that, it should trigger some kind of election, or it should trigger their removal from office by way of a vote from the general public or something like that. Because quite obviously, if their voter base have voted a politician into office because of their manifesto, and then they don't deliver on that manifesto, surely the public then have an ongoing say. They don't, by the way, but surely they should have an ongoing say as to whether that politician remains in office, because that's how they got into office, with their manifesto. The only way that works, and this is why I will bang on about this for, intermittently with other videos I will do for the next few years until the next election, so that people are aware that the only way to undo any of this is by another general election, which unless Keir Starmer resigns and unless there's a vote of no confidence or whatever else, or unless he calls another general election, unless any of those things happen, none of this is going to change until the next general election, in which case, Keir Starmer wants another term. I very much doubt he'll get another term at this rate, from judging by the public response. There are a lot of people still support him, obviously, but judging by the general public response, I don't think he's going to get another term. A lot of the things that he's saying that on the surface are positive are going to take 10 years to come to fruition. So, it's very doubtful that many of those we'll see during his parliament anyway. Now, whether or not you can hold someone accountable to those is a very philosophical debate, and I think we should be able to hold them to account. But the only way you can do that is by another general election, and so you can vote them out at the next general election. But Rachel Reeves would have it another way, because, as I say, there's always a tweet, or a post if you insist. Going back to 2022, Rachel Reeves, on a completely different topic, regarding Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak arguments that they'd broken the law then and lied to the British public, who Keir Starmer's words, not mine. Rachel Reeves said, it cannot be one rule for Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and another for everyone else. They've broken the rules, they've lied to the British people, they both have to go. So the hypocrisy and the irony here is palpable. Because if Rachel Reeves then was saying that if they've broken the rules and if they've lied to the public, then they have to go, then what is it that Keir Starmer's done when he said that not a penny more, quote unquote, on your council tax, and yet many of those areas are going up by up to 10%? And then, as it turns out, that statement from Keir Starmer ends up being false, because, and this comes to the crux of the video here, why you cannot prosecute would-be MPs for what they said previously, or even MPs for what they say, and that is twofold. It is because it's political statement and commentary, and it is open to change. And clearly, the promise made by Keir Starmer then, that there will be no more money on the council tax, he then, obviously, when he got into office, just turned around to say, well, we found all of this stuff that we didn't know about. Now, again, there's arguments as to how much of that they really knew about, and when they were talking about £22 billion black hole, actually it turns out a large chunk of it was money that he would have either known about or had promised unions and so on and so forth. And for what it's worth, some people criticise me as to certain sectors that deserve those pay rises, health workers, for example. Now, I am in support of paying everybody what they really deserve, but it should be properly funded and it should be done in a way that doesn't create all of these problems. But coming back to the point, the reason you can't prosecute them is because they will just say that things changed. And it would be wrong to be able to prosecute politicians if things have changed and then what they previously said turns out to be false and therefore they end up being prosecuted for fraud. I dare say many politicians over the years would have said something that has then changed and would have seen them prosecuted for fraud if that were the case. I do think, however, in the broad philosophical debate of all this, that politicians should be held accountable to their manifesto promises. If they say something in a manifesto, and that is what they will do, then they must do that. But that creates the problem. If, as Keir Starmer said, no increase in the council tax, and as they all said, no increase in national insurance, and I'm not going to split hairs whether national insurance is between employers and employees. It is all part of the same national insurance that one way or another the employee is responsible for. Proper and seasoned economists will agree and attest to that the worker is the product of that company and will ultimately be paying the insurance contributions. And so when they said there will be no increases, and there were increases, again, that is a contradictory statement. And so that's the difficult line. But I do think we need some rules, because otherwise this is going to flip back and forth for decades to come, and we're never really going to get anywhere. We're never really going to get a satisfactory answer. Now, bearing in mind, some people are of the camp that say, well, people voted Labour into power. Yes, obviously that is true, but don't forget that 80% of those registered to vote did not vote for Labour. That is a technically true statement. So you can go and check that. 80% of those eligible to vote did not vote for this Labour government. So I think there is a lot to answer for here. And in Rachel Reeves' own words back then, and in fact, I forgot to mention, Keir Starmer said the same thing. Keir Starmer said Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have broken the law and repeatedly lied to the British public. They must both resign, he said. And if it turns out, if it turns out that Keir Starmer broke the rules with his voice coach visiting him. Now, I made the comment on X. I don't think that the voice coach is a key worker in any sense of the word. Key workers were those that at the time were those essential for the COVID pandemic response and any other kind of key medical worker and so on. I mean, I made the comment that even as barristers, we were holding trials remotely by video in this very room that I'm sitting now. I did trials sitting right here. I did trials by video or even by telephone. I had more than one occasion, multiple occasions. I attended court right here by telephone. I was cross-examining witnesses by telephone. And that caused us huge problems because I had witnesses trying to fluff to me that they weren't sure about the bundle, because in court, obviously, you can physically check that they've got the bundle, and somebody will check. You hold it up and you say, "Can you hold it up for me? Can make sure that you've got the right page?" But on the telephone, they were telling me that they couldn't see the correct page, and so we were describing what the page looks like, and that's even beyond the page number, obviously. But eventually, we got there, and so if we could do that remotely, a voice coach does not need to attend in person. In my view, the voice coach was not a key worker. That is my view. And in my view, if a voice coach attended during one of those tiered lockdowns when they should have been doing it remotely and should not have been moving about and visiting someone in person, then in my view, that's a breaking of the rules. And according to both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, if that is the case, then he should resign. It's as simple as that. But we'll see, obviously. We'll see whether there's an investigation first of all, and we'll see if there is, what the finding is, what the outcome is, etc. but I think we all can see where this is going. But I just thought I'd do this little video for you because a lot of people have asked, why can't we hold them to account? And that is it, really. It's because it's a political statement, it's open to change, and we pretty much have a free-for-all political platform, particularly when it's in Parliament. There's parliamentary privilege, which I believe my learned friend Alan Robert Shaw's gone into in one of his videos. I'll link him below, go and check it out. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, whether you think... Let me know, first of all, do you think a voice coach is a key worker? I don't. My personal opinion, I certainly don't. So let me know what you think. Please do like the video and subscribe. That really does help my channel grow a lot more than you know. And as always, thank you for watching.